I'm Lisa Rodriguez, and for 8 years, my in laws treated me like a beautiful ornament Michael had splurged on but couldn't really afford. They whispered behind closed doors about how he was carrying the financial burden alone, while his wife played artist from home. They praised his generosity for letting me pursue my little design hobby instead of getting a real job. That carefully constructed narrative exploded during Carol's birthday dinner when Pacific Coast Credit Union called to discuss refinancing options for the primary borrower of our Elm Street home. The silence that followed my conversation wasn't just awkward, it was earth-shattering. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone call lasted exactly 47 seconds, but those 47 seconds unraveled 8 years of assumptions, 8 years of condescending smiles, 8 years of being treated like Michael's expensive charity case. When I hung up, 4 generations of the Peterson family stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to outright shock. Carol's carefully frosted birthday cake sat forgotten on the dining room table as the words primary borrower and business account verification hung in the air like smoke after a fire. The story begins 9 years ago when I was still Lisa Morales, a 26-year-old graphic designer working for a mid-sized marketing firm in downtown Los Angeles. I'd spent my entire adult life building something from nothing, climbing out of the foster care system through sheer determination and an art scholarship to Cal State Fullerton. By the time I met Michael at a mutual friend's barbecue in Riverside, I was already dreaming of starting my own design studio. I had a respectable salary, a reliable Honda Civic, and a small apartment in a decent neighborhood, but most importantly, I had plans. Michael Peterson was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. He was warm where I was guarded, social where I was cautious, and came from the kind of tight-knit family I'd only seen in movies. The Petersons had lived in Riverside for 3 generations. Frank had worked at the same auto repair shop for 35 years before retiring. Carol had taught 4th grade at Mountain View Elementary for 28 years. They owned a modest 3-bedroom house on Oak Avenue with a vegetable garden that Carol tended religiously and a garage workshop where Frank still tinkered with classic cars on weekends. Their Sunday dinners were legendary among their circle of friends. Carol would spend hours preparing pot roast with all the fixings, homemade rolls that filled the house with the scent of yeast and butter, and desserts that could have won county fair blue ribbons. The dining room table, inherited from Michael's great-grandmother, could seat 10 comfortably, and it was rarely empty. Extended family, neighbors, church friends, and anyone else who needed a good meal and warm company found their way to the Peterson table. During our courtship, I was invited to exactly 3 of these gatherings. Each time, I felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. The easy banter between family members, the inside jokes spanning decades, the comfortable familiarity of people who had never questioned their place in each other's lives. It was mesmerizing and intimidating in equal measure. Carol would ask polite questions about my work, but her interest seemed surface level, as if graphic design was a curious hobby rather than a legitimate career. Frank would nod and smile, but clearly didn't understand what exactly I did for 8 hours a day staring at a computer screen. Michael's sister Amanda was 24 then, newly married to Kevin, and already talking about starting a family. She had Carol's blonde hair and Frank's easy smile, and she possessed an effortless confidence that came from never having to prove her worth to anyone. During my second Sunday dinner, she asked if I was one of those career women who doesn't want children with the kind of casual cruelty that only comes from someone who's never had to choose between professional ambition and social acceptance. I should have recognized the warning signs then, but I was too enchanted by the idea of belonging to something stable and permanent. My foster care experience had left me with an acute appreciation for family dynamics, even complicated ones. The Petersons weren't perfect, but they were consistent. They showed up for each other's milestones, remembered birthdays without Facebook reminders, and had traditions that stretched back decades. After a childhood of temporary placements and broken promises, their reliability felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. Michael proposed on a hiking trail in the San Bernardino Mountains, exactly 1 year after we met. The ring was modest but thoughtfully chosen, a vintage setting from an antique shop in Old Town Riverside that he knew I'd love more than something flashy from a chain store. We planned a small wedding at St. Mary's Catholic Church, followed by a reception in the church hall decorated with flowers from Carol's garden and centerpieces I designed myself using skills I'd honed in art school. The wedding preparations revealed the first cracks in my idealized vision of Peterson family harmony. Carol had very specific ideas about how things should be done, from the menu to the music, to the seating arrangements. When I suggested incorporating some elements from my Mexican heritage, my birth mother's culture that I'd researched and embraced as an adult, Carol's smile became strained. She worried about the church allowing non-traditional elements and whether Frank's elderly relatives would understand ethnic foods. Her concerns were couched in politeness, but the message was clear: the wedding should reflect Peterson traditions, not dilute them with outside influences. Michael, caught between his mother's expectations and his fiancé's wishes, chose the path of least resistance. We had a lovely traditional Catholic ceremony, followed by a reception featuring Carol's famous lasagna, Frank's carefully curated playlist of classic rock, and decorations that could have been carbon copies of Amanda's wedding 2 years earlier. I convinced myself that compromise was the foundation of healthy relationships, that my desire to honor my heritage was selfish when weighed against the happiness of my new family. Our honeymoon was a long weekend in San Francisco, the most exotic destination Michael felt comfortable affording on his sales manager's salary. We stayed at a modest hotel near Fisherman's Wharf, ate sourdough bread and clam chowder, and took tourist photos at Alcatraz and the Golden Gate Bridge. It was sweet and romantic in its simplicity, but I found myself wondering what it would be like to travel somewhere that required a passport, to experience cultures and cuisines completely foreign to the familiar rhythms of suburban Southern California. When we returned from our honeymoon, the reality of married life in Riverside settled around us like morning fog. Michael had found us a rental house in the Maple Grove subdivision, a pleasant neighborhood of ranch-style homes built in the 1980s with small front yards and 2-car garages. The house was perfectly adequate.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with updated appliances, and a living room with a fireplace we never used because Riverside rarely got cold enough to justify the gas bill. I commuted to Los Angeles for the first year of our marriage, spending 2 hours each day on the 91 freeway, while Michael worked at a pharmaceutical supply company 15 minutes from our house. The contrast in our daily experiences became increasingly stark. I was immersed in the creative energy of downtown LA, working with clients who valued innovation and pushing boundaries, while Michael inhabited the comfortable predictability of Riverside's business community, where relationships were more important than revolutionary ideas and stability trumped creativity every time. The decision to start my own design business came gradually, born from frustration with my employer's conservative approach to client work and my own growing confidence in my abilities. I had been building a portfolio of freelance projects on evenings and weekends, working with small businesses and nonprofits who couldn't afford big agency fees, but still wanted professional quality design work. My spare bedroom had transformed into a makeshift office filled with computer equipment, drawing tablets and portfolio samples that represented hundreds of hours of unpaid labor and unbridled passion. Michael was supportive in theory, but practical in execution. He worried about the financial instability of entrepreneurship, the lack of benefits and steady paychecks, the risk of failure in a competitive industry. His concerns weren't unreasonable, but they reflected a fundamental difference in our approaches to risk and reward. Michael valued security above all else, while I was willing to gamble on my own potential. We spent countless evenings at our kitchen table, surrounded by spreadsheets and business plans, trying to find a compromise between his need for stability and my desire for independence. The breakthrough came when I landed my first major client, a boutique hotel chain that needed a complete rebrand, including logo design, marketing materials, and website development. The contract was worth more than my annual salary at the LA marketing firm, and it came with the promise of ongoing work if they were satisfied with my initial deliverables. For the first time, Michael began to see my little design hobby as a legitimate business opportunity, rather than an expensive distraction from real, adult responsibilities. Carol and Frank's reaction to my entrepreneurial venture was politely skeptical. They had lived through economic downturns and industry changes that had affected their friends and neighbors, and they viewed small business ownership as unnecessarily risky when stable employment was available. During Sunday dinners, they would ask how my art business was going with the kind of indulgent tone usually reserved for children's lemonade stands. Their questions focused on whether I was making any real money yet, rather than the creative challenges or professional satisfaction I found in the work. Amanda's response was more directly challenging. She had given birth to Tyler a year after my wedding, and had embraced stay-at-home motherhood with the same confidence she brought to everything else in her life. She frequently made comments about women who abandoned their children for career ambitions, and worried aloud about couples who lived beyond their means by taking financial risks. Her criticism stung because it hit so close to my own insecurities about balancing professional ambition with family expectations. The real tension emerged when Michael and I began house hunting after 2 years of marriage. My business had grown substantially, allowing us to qualify for a much larger mortgage than Michael's salary alone would have supported. We looked at houses in neighborhoods that would have been completely out of reach on a single income, toured properties with home offices, guest bedrooms, and landscaping that required professional maintenance. I fell in love with a 4-bedroom ranch on Elm Street that had been completely renovated by a couple who were relocating for work. The house represented everything I had worked toward since aging out of foster care at 18. It had hardwood floors instead of carpet, granite countertops instead of laminate, and a master suite with a walk-in closet larger than my first apartment. Most importantly, it had a perfect space for my expanding business, a converted bedroom with built-in shelving, excellent natural light, and enough room for multiple computer workstations when I was ready to hire employees. The mortgage application process revealed the full extent of my business success to the lending officer, but somehow this information never made its way to the Peterson family. Michael had filled out most of the paperwork, and when our loan was approved, the congratulations and celebration focused on his achievement in providing such a beautiful home for his family. I was too grateful for their acceptance and too uncomfortable with financial discussions to correct their assumptions about our respective contributions to the down payment and monthly mortgage obligations. Moving into the Elm Street house felt like crossing a threshold into genuine adulthood. For the first time in my life, I had a space that truly belonged to me, rooms I could decorate according to my own taste, rather than someone else's expectations. I painted the office walls a deep teal color that sparked my creativity, hung framed samples of my best work, and invested in professional-grade equipment that transformed my freelance hobby into a legitimate design studio. Creative Edge Design Studio launched officially 6 months after we moved into the house. I had business cards printed on heavy cardstock, a website that showcased my expanding portfolio, and promotional materials that reflected the same attention to detail I brought to client work. The business grew through word-of-mouth referrals and networking events, gradually expanding from local restaurants and retail shops to larger corporations that needed ongoing design support for marketing campaigns and product launches. The irony of my situation became more apparent with each passing year. I was earning more money than I had ever imagined possible, working with clients across California and occasionally taking on projects from companies in other states. My reputation in the design community was growing, and I had been invited to speak at several industry conferences about building a successful freelance practice. Yet every Sunday at the Peterson family table, I sat quietly while Carol praised Michael's hard work, and Frank worried about whether he was pushing himself too hard to maintain our lifestyle. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. Monday through Friday, I was Lisa Rodriguez, successful business owner and creative professional. I made decisions that affected my clients' success, managed complex projects with tight deadlines, and earned respect from colleagues who valued my expertise and innovative approach to visual communication. Sunday afternoons, I transformed back into Michael's wife, the woman who had been fortunate enough to marry a man, generous enough to support her artistic pursuits, while he handled the real responsibility of providing for their family. Michael's complicity in this deception was perhaps the most painful aspect of our family dynamic. He genuinely loved and respected me, and in private moments, he acknowledged my professional achievements and financial contributions to our household. But in front of his family, he accepted credit for accomplishments that were largely mine, nodded along when his parents praised his sacrifice and generosity, and never corrected their assumptions about our respective roles in maintaining our comfortable lifestyle. The annual Christmas gift exchange became a particularly vivid illustration of this problem. Each year, Michael and I would carefully select presents for his extended family, choosing items that reflected thoughtfulness and a generous budget. Carol would always thank Michael specifically for spoiling everyone, and Frank would pat his son's shoulder while commenting on his big heart and ability to take care of everyone. I could have been invisible for all the acknowledgement I received for selecting, purchasing, and wrapping gifts that sometimes represented significant portions of my monthly business income. Amanda's financial struggles added another layer of complexity to family gatherings. Kevin's work as an electrician was inconsistent, dependent on construction cycles and weather conditions that often left him unemployed for weeks at a time. They lived in a smaller house in an older neighborhood, drove used cars that required frequent repairs, and carefully budgeted for expenses that Michael and I took for granted. During family dinners, Amanda would make pointed comments about couples who flaunted their wealth and questioned whether it was Christian to spend money on luxuries when other people were struggling to pay their bills. I wanted to help Amanda and Kevin to offer business advice or even direct financial assistance, but I couldn't do so without revealing the true source of our family's income. Amanda saw me as a privileged housewife whose husband was generous enough to support her hobbies, not as a successful entrepreneur who might understand the challenges of building a business from scratch. Her resentment toward our apparent prosperity was directed at Michael, whom she viewed as showing off his success, while his sister struggled to make ends meet. The breaking point was approaching slowly, like a storm system building over the ocean before making landfall. I could feel the pressure mounting from multiple directions: my own frustration with being invisible, Michael's increasing comfort with accepting undeserved credit, his family's growing assumptions about our financial dynamic, and Amanda's mounting resentment toward what she perceived as our carefree prosperity. Something had to give, and that something turned out to be a routine phone call on a Tuesday evening in early spring. Carol's 62nd birthday was approaching, and she had requested a simple family dinner at our house, rather than her usual elaborate celebration at a restaurant. She wanted to showcase our beautiful dining room, she said, and enjoy the kind of intimate gathering that was only possible in a private home. I spent the entire day preparing her favorite foods, decorating the dining room with flowers from my garden, and setting the table with our wedding china that rarely saw use outside of major holidays. The Peterson family arrived promptly at 6 o'clock, as they always did. Frank carried a bottle of wine that he had been saving for a special occasion. Amanda brought Tyler and Sophie, who immediately ran to the living room to play with the toys I kept in a basket specifically for their visits. Kevin seemed more relaxed than usual, having recently started a new construction project that promised steady work through the summer months. Carol wore the pearl necklace Frank had given her for their 20th wedding anniversary, and beamed with the satisfaction of a woman celebrating another year of life, surrounded by people she loved. We were halfway through dinner, discussing Carol's plans for her retirement garden and Frank's latest automotive restoration project, when my phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the caller ID showed Pacific Coast Credit Union, our mortgage lender. I had been expecting a call about refinancing options, but I hadn't realized they would contact me during evening hours. Apologizing to the table, I stepped into the kitchen to take the call, assuming it would be a brief conversation about paperwork or scheduling. The loan officer was professional and efficient, confirming my identity as the primary borrower and my business information as the main income source for our refinancing application. She needed to verify some details about Creative Edge Design Studio's recent revenue, and wanted to schedule an appointment for the following week to review our options for adjusting our mortgage terms. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but every word was clearly audible to the family members, sitting just a few feet away in our open-concept dining room. When I returned to the table, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Carol's fork was suspended halfway to her mouth, and she was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Frank had stopped mid-sentence in his story about a 1967 Mustang he was considering purchasing. Amanda's eyes were wide with shock, and Kevin was looking back and forth between Michael and me, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. Even Tyler and Sophie had wandered back from the living room, drawn by the sudden silence that had replaced the cheerful conversation they had been ignoring. Michael's face had gone pale, and I could see him mentally calculating how much of the phone conversation his family had overheard. The words primary borrower and main income source hung in the air like accusations, and I realized that 8 years of carefully maintained assumptions were about to crumble in the space of a single evening. The birthday cake I had spent hours decorating sat untouched on the sideboard, while 4 adults tried to process information that fundamentally challenged everything they thought they knew about our family's financial dynamics. Part 2. Character Introduction: The Dream Beginning. When I first met Michael Peterson at Rebecca Martinez's backyard barbecue in downtown Riverside, I was convinced the universe had finally decided to throw me a bone. After 26 years of navigating life without a safety net, watching other people's families from the outside, and building my career through pure stubborn determination, I had stumbled into something that felt like a romantic comedy come to life. Michael was manning the grill with the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world, wearing a faded Angels baseball cap and telling stories that made everyone around him laugh until their sides hurt. He wasn't the most handsome man at the party, but there was something magnetic about the way he moved through conversations, remembering details about people's lives, asking follow-up questions about their jobs and families, making everyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. When Rebecca introduced us, Michael's face lit up with genuine curiosity, rather than the polite interest I usually encountered when people learned I was a graphic designer. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, wanted to know about the creative process behind logo design, and seemed fascinated by the intersection of art and business that defined my daily life. The Peterson family story unfolded gradually over our first few months of dating, revealed in casual mentions during dinner conversations and weekend activities that painted a picture of multi-generational stability. I had only experienced in other people's Christmas cards. Michael's great-grandfather had moved to Riverside in 1952 to work in the citrus groves that once dominated the landscape, eventually saving enough money to buy a small house on Oak Avenue that became the foundation of the family's American dream. His grandfather had expanded the house, adding a second bathroom, and converting the garage into a workshop where 3 generations of Peterson men had learned to work with their hands. Frank Peterson embodied everything I imagined a father should be. He was patient with children, loyal to his friends, and possessed the kind of practical wisdom that came from decades of solving problems with his hands, rather than his mouth. At Peterson's Auto Repair, he was known for his honest assessments and fair prices, qualities that had earned him a customer base spanning multiple generations of Riverside families. When people brought their cars to Frank, they weren't just seeking mechanical expertise, they were looking for someone they could trust to tell them the truth about expensive repairs and help them make decisions that balanced safety with financial reality. Carol Peterson was the emotional heart of the family, a woman who had dedicated her life to nurturing other people's children and creating a home that served as a gathering place for anyone who needed warmth, food, or simply a place to belong. Her 4th-grade classroom at Mountain View Elementary was legendary among parents for its perfect balance of structure and creativity, discipline and fun. Former students would return years later to visit Mrs. Peterson, bringing their own children to meet the teacher who had taught them to love reading and believe in their own potential. The Peterson house on Oak Avenue was a testament to Carol's belief that home should be a sanctuary for both family and friends. Every room reflected her attention to detail and commitment to comfort over style. The living room furniture was arranged to encourage conversation rather than television watching. The kitchen was designed for serious cooking, with a large island where family members could gather to help with meal preparation or simply keep the cook company. The dining room table, crafted by Michael's grandfather from walnut trees that had grown on the original family property, could expand to accommodate holiday gatherings that sometimes included 30 or more people. Sunday dinners at the Peterson house were legendary events that required days of preparation and planning. Carol would begin her cooking on Saturday afternoon, preparing desserts and side dishes that could be finished the following day. Sunday morning, she would attend early Mass at St. Mary's, then return home to begin the final preparations for a meal that typically included multiple courses, homemade bread, and at least 2 dessert options. The dining room would be set with her mother's china, cloth napkins that had been in the family for decades, and centerpieces created from flowers she grew in her meticulously maintained garden. The guest list for these gatherings seemed to expand organically, driven by Carol's inability to turn away anyone who might be spending the day alone. Elderly neighbors, whose families lived far away, recently divorced church members, who were still adjusting to single life, young couples with small children, who needed a break from the isolation of new parenthood, and anyone else, who might benefit from a home-cooked meal and warm company, found their way to the Peterson table. Carol would somehow stretch the food to accommodate unexpected additions, setting up card tables in the living room when the dining room reached capacity, making everyone feel like their presence was not just welcome, but essential to the success of the gathering. Michael thrived in this environment of generous hospitality and unconditional acceptance. He was the youngest of Carol and Frank's 3 children, born 6 years after Amanda, and 4 years after his brother David, who had moved to Portland after college and visited only during major holidays. This age gap had made Michael something of a beloved mascot during his childhood, doted on by parents who had relaxed into their parenting roles, and older siblings who found him entertaining rather than annoying. He had grown up with the confidence that came from being universally adored, never questioning whether he deserved the love and attention that surrounded him. As an adult, Michael carried this easy confidence into every aspect of his life. At work, he was known for his ability to build relationships with difficult clients, his talent for finding creative solutions to complex problems, and his gift for making people feel heard and valued. His sales numbers were consistently among the highest in his division, not because he was particularly aggressive or manipulative, but because customers genuinely liked him and trusted his recommendations. He approached his job with the same generous spirit that characterized his family relationships, viewing each client interaction as an opportunity to help someone solve a problem rather than simply make a sale. Our courtship unfolded with the comfortable predictability of a couple who fit naturally into each other's lives. Michael was fascinated by my independence and career ambition, qualities that were rare among the women in his social circle, but which he found attractive rather than threatening. He encouraged my professional goals, celebrated my successes, and seemed genuinely proud to be dating someone who was building something meaningful from scratch. During our early months together, he would often bring friends and colleagues to visit my makeshift home office, showing off my portfolio with the same pride he might display for his own accomplishments. I was equally charmed by Michael's groundedness and family connections. After years of building my identity around professional achievement and personal independence, I found myself craving the stability and belonging that seemed to come so naturally to him. The Peterson family gatherings were a revelation to someone who had spent holidays working extra shifts or volunteering at community organizations rather than celebrating with relatives. The easy affection between family members, the shared memories that could be triggered by a particular song or smell, and the comfortable familiarity of people who had known each other their entire lives created an atmosphere I had only imagined from watching other families from a distance. The engagement happened exactly 18 months after we met, during a hiking trip to the San Bernardino Mountains that had become one of our regular weekend activities. Michael had chosen a spot overlooking the valley where we could see the lights of Riverside spreading out below us, a view that encompassed both our individual pasts and our shared future. The ring was perfect in its simplicity, a vintage setting from an antique shop that reflected his understanding of my aesthetic preferences and his commitment to choosing something meaningful rather than expensive. Wedding planning revealed the first subtle tensions in my relationship with the Peterson family, though I was too grateful for their acceptance to recognize these early warning signs as anything more than minor differences of opinion. Carol had very specific ideas about how a proper wedding should be conducted, preferences that reflected generations of family traditions and community expectations. The ceremony should be held at St. Mary's, where Michael had been baptized and confirmed, and where Carol had served on the altar society for more than 20 years. The reception should feature traditional foods that could be prepared by family members, creating a collaborative celebration that would demonstrate the community's support for the new couple. My desire to incorporate elements from my Mexican heritage met with polite resistance that was difficult to challenge without appearing ungrateful or demanding. When I suggested serving traditional Mexican dishes alongside Carol's planned menu, she worried about whether Frank's elderly relatives would appreciate spicy food and whether the church kitchen could accommodate unfamiliar preparation requirements. When I proposed including mariachi music during the cocktail hour, she expressed concern about noise levels and whether such entertainment would be appropriate for a church-sponsored event. Michael found himself caught between his mother's expectations and his fiancé's wishes, a position that foreshadowed many future conflicts. He wanted both women to be happy, but when forced to choose between maintaining family harmony and supporting my cultural expression, he consistently chose the path of least resistance. Each compromise felt reasonable in isolation, but together they created a pattern that would define our marriage for years to come. I learned to present my preferences as suggestions rather than requirements, to frame my desires in terms of what would make others comfortable, rather than what would honor my own identity. The wedding itself was beautiful in its traditional simplicity, a celebration that could have been photographed for a magazine article about classic American ceremonies. I wore Carol's grandmother's pearl necklace with my dress, carried flowers from her garden in my bouquet, and promised to love and honor Michael using words that had been spoken by countless Peterson brides before me. The reception featured Carol's famous lasagna, Frank's carefully curated playlist of songs that had been popular during their own courtship, and decorations that perfectly matched the church's existing decor. Our honeymoon was a long weekend in San Francisco, the first time either of us had traveled together outside of Southern California. We stayed at a modest hotel near Union Square, took tourist photos at Fisherman's Wharf and Alcatraz, and ate our way through Chinatown and Little Italy with the enthusiasm of small-town visitors experiencing big city sophistication. Michael was the perfect travel companion, patient with my desire to photograph everything, game for walking miles through unfamiliar neighborhoods, and generous with compliments about my ability to navigate public transportation and restaurant reservations. The trip gave me my first glimpse of what our life might look like outside the comfortable boundaries of Riverside, and I found myself fantasizing about future travels to places that would challenge us both to grow beyond our familiar routines. Michael seemed equally excited by the possibilities, talking about saving money for a trip to Europe or perhaps exploring the national parks throughout the western United States. We spent hours walking through Golden Gate Park discussing our dreams for the future, making plans that felt both ambitious and achievable with two steady incomes and a shared commitment to adventure. Returning to Riverside after our honeymoon felt like settling into a warm bath after a bracing shower. Everything was familiar and comfortable, from the predictable traffic patterns on the freeway to the friendly faces of neighbors who welcomed us home with casseroles and congratulations. The house Michael had rented for us in Maple Grove was perfectly adequate for a young couple starting their married life, with enough space for a home office where I could continue my freelance work, and a spare bedroom that could eventually be converted into a nursery when we were ready to start a family. The neighborhood was quintessentially suburban, filled with young families, retirees and middle-aged couples whose children had recently left for college. Our immediate neighbors were friendly without being intrusive, the kind of people who would wave from their driveways and offer to collect our mail during vacation trips but who respected boundaries and privacy. The homeowners association maintained common areas and enforced modest standards for lawn care and exterior maintenance, creating an environment that was both attractive and predictable. My daily commute to downtown Los Angeles became a meditation on the contrast between my professional and personal worlds. During the hour-long drive each morning, I would transition from Lisa the wife and neighbor to Lisa the graphic designer, mentally preparing for meetings with clients who valued creativity and innovation above comfort and tradition. The return trip each evening required the reverse transformation, shifting from my role as a confident professional to my identity as Michael's supportive wife and the newest member of the Peterson family. This daily transformation felt manageable at first, even empowering in its complexity. I took pride in my ability to navigate different environments with equal skill, to be equally comfortable presenting design concepts to corporate executives, and helping Carol prepare Sunday dinner for 15 people. The challenge of maintaining authentic relationships across such different contexts seemed like evidence of my adaptability, rather than a warning sign of deeper conflicts to come. Part 3, the subtle shift. When things changed, the transformation in my relationship with the Peterson family didn't happen overnight. It crept in like fog rolling off the ocean, so gradual that I barely noticed until I was completely surrounded by it. The shift began approximately 6 months after our wedding, when the novelty of having a new family member had worn off and everyone had settled into more authentic patterns of interaction. The polite interest in my work that had characterized our early relationship slowly gave way to a more casual dismissal that was harder to pinpoint but impossible to ignore. Carol's questions about my job became increasingly perfunctory, the kind of obligatory inquiries that family members make to demonstrate interest without actually listening to the answers. When I mentioned landing a new client or completing a challenging project, she would smile and nod before quickly changing the subject to something she found more engaging, usually related to Michael's work or the activities of other family members. Her attention would visibly drift when I tried to explain the creative process behind a logo design, or the strategic thinking required for a successful marketing campaign, as if my professional challenges were too abstract or unimportant to warrant serious consideration. Frank's reaction was even more telling in its complete lack of engagement. He would listen politely when I described my work, but his questions revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what graphic design actually involved. He seemed to view my job as something akin to arts and crafts, a hobby that happened to generate some income, rather than a legitimate profession requiring skill and business acumen. When I tried to explain the technical aspects of digital design, or the importance of brand consistency across multiple platforms, his eyes would glaze over with the same expression he wore when Carol discussed the plot of her favorite soap opera. Amanda's attitude toward my career was more openly dismissive, perhaps because she felt less obligation to maintain family harmony than her parents. She frequently made comments about women who prioritized work over family, and questioned whether it was natural for wives to focus on professional advancement rather than supporting their husbands' careers. Her criticism was always couched in general terms rather than direct attacks, but the implications were clear enough to make every conversation feel like a minefield of potential offense. The most painful aspect of this growing dismissal was Michael's gradual participation in it. During our dating period, he had been genuinely interested in my work and proud of my achievements. He would ask detailed questions about my projects, offer suggestions for solving creative challenges, and celebrate my successes with the same enthusiasm he brought to his own professional victories. After our wedding, however, his attention to my career began to wane, replaced by a more general acknowledgement that I was doing well with my design work, without any real understanding of what that meant. Family gatherings became exercises in conversational navigation that left me emotionally exhausted. The topics that generated enthusiasm and engagement from other family members: Michael's latest sales achievements, Amanda's children's school activities, Frank's automotive projects, Carol's gardening successes, were areas where I had little to contribute beyond polite interest and supportive comments. When the conversation turned to my work, it was usually in the context of how it affected my availability for family obligations, rather than any genuine curiosity about my professional life. The subtle nature of this dismissal made it particularly difficult to address directly. No one was overtly rude or deliberately hurtful. They simply treated my career as less significant than other family members' activities and interests. When I tried to discuss my frustration with Michael, he would reassure me that his family loved and accepted me, pointing to their warm greetings and inclusion in family events as evidence of their affection. He couldn't see, or chose not to see, the difference between being included and being valued, between social acceptance and genuine respect. My freelance business continued to grow during this period, adding clients and expanding into new areas of expertise that required additional equipment and software investments. I converted our spare bedroom into a proper office, complete with professional lighting, high-end computer equipment, and storage systems for the portfolio materials and reference books that were essential to my work. The transformation of this space felt symbolic of my growing confidence and professional identity, but it also created a physical barrier between my work life and my family relationships. The office became my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on projects that challenged my creativity and utilized my skills without constantly defending the legitimacy of my choices. Behind the closed door of my home office, I was free to be the professional version of myself that clients respected and colleagues admired. I could spend hours perfecting a logo design, researching typography options, or developing comprehensive branding strategies without anyone questioning whether my time might be better spent on more traditional pursuits. The contrast between my professional confidence and my family insecurity became increasingly stark as my business expanded. During the workday, I fielded calls from potential clients who sought my expertise, collaborated with other professionals who valued my input, and made decisions that affected the success of businesses and organizations throughout Southern California. In the evening, I would sit quietly at Sunday dinner while Carol and Frank discussed Michael's latest promotion or Amanda's volunteer work at the children's school, feeling like an outsider looking in on conversations that somehow never included topics where I could contribute meaningfully. The financial dynamics of our household added another layer of complexity to these shifting relationships. My income from freelance work was becoming increasingly significant, sometimes exceeding Michael's monthly salary when I landed larger projects or worked with clients who paid premium rates for rush deadlines. We were able to afford upgrades to our rental house, take weekend trips that would have been difficult on a single income, and begin saving for the down payment on a home purchase that seemed increasingly realistic with our combined earnings. However, the Peterson family's understanding of our financial situation remained rooted in traditional assumptions about gender roles and earning potential. They praised Michael for his ability to provide for his family and made admiring comments about his willingness to support Lisa's artistic interests, without any awareness that my contributions were often equal to or greater than his. When we announced plans to look for a house to purchase, the congratulations and celebration focused entirely on Michael's achievement in reaching this milestone, as if my income was irrelevant to our mortgage qualification. This misunderstanding created an increasingly uncomfortable situation during family discussions about money and financial planning. Frank would offer unsolicited advice about budgeting and saving, addressing his comments exclusively to Michael as if I was either incapable of understanding financial concepts or irrelevant to our household's economic decisions. Carol would make sympathetic comments about the pressure Michael must feel as the family's primary breadwinner, never acknowledging that this pressure was actually shared between both spouses. The house hunting process revealed the full extent of the Peterson family's misconceptions about our financial reality. When we began looking at properties in neighborhoods they considered beyond our means, their concern was always framed in terms of Michael's ability to handle the financial responsibility. They worried that he was overextending himself to provide a nice home for his wife, never considering that our mortgage qualification might be based on combined income rather than his salary alone. Their expressions of concern, while well-intentioned, reinforced the assumption that my financial contributions were negligible or temporary. Amanda's increasing financial difficulties during this period added another dimension to the family's focus on traditional gender roles and economic responsibility. Kevin's work as an electrician was seasonal and unpredictable, leaving them struggling to maintain consistent income throughout the year. They had been forced to move to a smaller house in an older neighborhood, drive cars that required frequent expensive repairs, and carefully budget for expenses that Michael and I were beginning to take for granted. Amanda's resentment toward our apparent prosperity was palpable during family gatherings, expressed through pointed comments about couples who lived beyond their means, and questions about whether it was responsible to spend money on home improvements when other family members were struggling financially. Her criticism was always directed at Michael, whom she viewed as either showing off his success or failing to share his good fortune with family members who needed help. She saw me as a fortunate beneficiary of Michael's generosity, rather than a contributing partner who might be partially responsible for our financial stability. The irony of Amanda's situation was that I wanted desperately to help her and Kevin navigate their financial challenges, but I couldn't offer assistance without revealing the true nature of our household income and my role in generating it. As a business owner who had built her practice from nothing, I understood the challenges they faced and had practical advice that might have helped them develop additional income streams or manage their irregular earnings more effectively. However, since the family viewed me as someone who was financially dependent on Michael, any offer of help would have seemed presumptuous or inappropriate. The growing tension around financial assumptions came to a head during one particularly uncomfortable Sunday dinner when Frank launched into a lengthy lecture about the importance of living within one's means and avoiding the temptation to keep up with the Joneses. His comments were clearly directed at Michael, whom he suspected of spending too much money trying to impress people rather than focusing on long-term financial security. The conversation was painful to witness because it was based on such a fundamental misunderstanding of our actual situation, but I couldn't correct his assumptions without revealing information that Michael and I had tacitly agreed to keep private. Michael's response to his father's concerns was to accept the criticism gracefully while deflecting specific questions about our budget and spending patterns. He neither confirmed nor denied the implications of Frank's lecture, allowing his family to maintain their assumptions about our financial dynamics while avoiding direct lies about my contributions to our household income. This approach preserved family harmony in the short term, but reinforced misconceptions that were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain as my business continued to grow, and our lifestyle reflected our combined earning potential. The emotional toll of these ongoing misunderstandings was beginning to affect my relationship with Michael and my sense of identity within his family. I found myself becoming quieter during family gatherings, less likely to contribute to conversations about future plans or financial decisions, more aware of the disconnect between how I was perceived and who I actually was. The confident professional persona that I inhabited during work hours felt increasingly distant from the diminished version of myself that appeared at Peterson family events. Part 4. The Compromised Difficult Decisions. The conversation that would define the next several years of my marriage took place on a Tuesday evening in late October, approximately 18 months after our wedding. Michael had returned from a particularly challenging day at work to find me in my office, surrounded by portfolio samples and contract negotiations for what would become the largest project in my freelance career. A regional restaurant chain was considering hiring me to redesign their entire brand identity, including logo development, menu design, interior decor consultation, and marketing materials for their expansion into new markets. The potential contract was worth more than I had earned in the previous 6 months combined, and it represented the kind of breakthrough that could transform my freelance practice into a legitimate design firm. Michael found me at my desk, reviewing preliminary sketches and cost estimates while simultaneously researching competitors and market positioning strategies. The scope of the project required a level of professional sophistication that went far beyond the small business logos and promotional flyers that had comprised most of my previous work. I was excited about the creative challenges involved and nervous about whether I could deliver results that justified the client's investment in my services. The deadline for submitting my proposal was approaching quickly, and I had been working 12-hour days to ensure that every aspect of my presentation would demonstrate the expertise and professionalism necessary to win such a significant contract. When Michael sat down beside my desk to review the materials I had been preparing, his expression shifted from casual interest to genuine surprise. He had been peripherally aware of my growing client base and increasing income, but seeing the financial projections and project timeline laid out in formal business documents made the scale of my professional growth suddenly concrete and undeniable. The contract I was pursuing would require several months of intensive work and would generate more revenue than his annual salary, facts that we had both understood intellectually but had never confronted so directly. His initial reaction was enthusiastic and supportive, reflecting the same pride in my achievements that had characterized our early relationship. He asked detailed questions about the creative process, wanted to understand the business strategy behind my pricing decisions, and offered suggestions for strengthening my proposal presentation. For several hours that evening, we worked together on refining my materials, combining his sales experience with my design expertise to create a proposal that addressed both creative and business considerations with equal sophistication. However, as we discussed the implications of winning such a large contract, practical concerns began to emerge that would ultimately reshape our entire approach to my career and our family relationships. The project would require me to travel occasionally for client meetings and site visits, work irregular hours to accommodate the restaurant chain's operational schedules, and potentially hire subcontractors or temporary assistants to help with specific aspects of the branding implementation. These requirements represented a significant departure from the home-based, flexible schedule that had characterized my freelance work up to that point. Michael's concerns about these changes were reasonable and well-intentioned, rooted in genuine worry about how increased work demands might affect our marriage and our plans for starting a family. He worried that success in landing such major clients might lead to even larger projects with more extensive travel requirements, potentially transforming my career from a convenient home-based business into a demanding profession that could interfere with our shared goals for the future. His questions about work-life balance and long-term career planning reflected the same practical mindset that made him successful in his own job. The conversation took a more complicated turn when Michael began discussing how my potential success might be perceived by his family. particularly in light of recent tensions surrounding Amanda's financial difficulties and Frank's lectures about fiscal responsibility. He pointed out that his parents' generation had very specific ideas about appropriate roles for married women, expectations that were rooted in their own experiences and the cultural norms of their youth. While they had accepted my freelance work as a harmless hobby that contributed some supplemental income to our household, they might be less comfortable with a wife whose career achievements and earning potential exceeded traditional boundaries. Michael's analysis of his family's likely reaction was unfortunately accurate, based on months of subtle comments and reactions that we had both observed during Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. His parents' questions about my work had become increasingly perfunctory, their interest limited to whether my design hobby was keeping me too busy to fulfill what they considered more important obligations as a wife and potential mother. The idea that my career might become the primary focus of my time and energy, or that my income might exceed Michael's, would challenge fundamental assumptions about marriage and family roles that they had never questioned. The solution Michael proposed seemed reasonable at the time, a temporary compromise that would allow me to pursue professional opportunities while maintaining family harmony and avoiding uncomfortable conversations about gender roles and financial dynamics. He suggested that we avoid discussing the specific details of my income and career growth with his family, allowing them to maintain their assumptions about our financial arrangement, while giving me the freedom to build my business without external pressure or criticism. This approach appealed to me for several reasons that reflected both my professional ambitions and my deep desire to belong to Michael's family. I was eager to pursue the restaurant chain contract and other sophisticated projects that could establish my reputation in the competitive Southern California design market. I was also reluctant to risk the warm acceptance I had found within the Peterson family circle, particularly given my own background of unstable relationships and uncertain belonging. The prospect of becoming a source of family tension or conflict was genuinely frightening to someone who had spent most of her life navigating temporary living situations and provisional relationships. Michael's argument that family harmony was more important than technical accuracy in financial discussions seemed compelling in the abstract, especially when combined with his assurance that we would eventually reveal the true scope of my professional success once it became more established and undeniable. He painted a picture of future family gatherings, where my achievements would be celebrated and appreciated, once his parents had time to adjust to changing social norms and witness firsthand the positive effects of my career on our family's stability and happiness. The decision to maintain this deception required ongoing collaboration and mutual understanding that initially felt like evidence of our strong partnership and shared commitment to both professional success and family relationships. We developed subtle strategies for deflecting questions about our finances, redirecting conversations away from topics that might reveal the true scope of my income, and presenting our decisions about major purchases or lifestyle changes in ways that emphasized Michael's role while minimizing my contributions.
These tactics worked remarkably well in the beginning, perhaps because the Peterson family was predisposed to interpret our situation according to their existing assumptions about marriage and financial responsibility. When we announced our intention to look for a house to purchase, their excitement and congratulations focused entirely on Michael's achievement in reaching this milestone of adult success. When we took weekend trips to San Francisco or San Diego, they praised Michael's generosity in treating his wife to such nice experiences. When I upgraded my office equipment to handle larger projects, they commented approvingly on Michael's support for my artistic interests. The emotional cost of maintaining this deception was initially manageable, even empowering in some ways that I hadn't anticipated. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing that I was exceeding expectations and achieving success that others couldn't imagine, even if that success had to remain largely invisible. I felt like I was living a double life that allowed me to excel professionally while also fitting into traditional family structures that valued different kinds of achievements and contributions. However, as my business continued to grow and the gap between perception and reality widened, the psychological toll of this arrangement became increasingly difficult to manage. Every family gathering required careful self-monitoring to avoid accidentally revealing information that would contradict the established narrative about our financial dynamics. I had to remember to downplay my professional achievements, deflect questions about my work schedule, and allow Michael to receive credit for decisions and purchases that were largely enabled by my income. The restaurant chain contract, which I ultimately won after a competitive bidding process, marked a turning point in both my career trajectory and the complexity of maintaining our family deception.
The project was even more successful than I had anticipated, leading to referrals from other businesses in the hospitality industry and establishing my reputation as a specialist in restaurant and retail branding. Within 6 months, I had hired my first subcontractor to help with overflow work, upgraded to a larger office space in our home, and begun developing systems and processes that could support a small but growing design firm. The success of this project and the subsequent growth of my business created a snowball effect that transformed my professional identity and earning potential in ways that neither Michael nor I had fully anticipated when we made our initial agreement to downplay my career achievements. What had begun as a temporary strategy to avoid family conflict had evolved into an elaborate ongoing deception that required constant vigilance and collaboration to maintain. Michael's role in this arrangement became increasingly complex as my success became more difficult to hide and explain away. He found himself in the position of accepting credit for achievements that were largely mine, deflecting questions about our lifestyle and spending patterns, and maintaining a facade of financial responsibility that didn't reflect our actual situation. While he never explicitly lied about my contributions to our household income, his failure to correct his family's assumptions created a pattern of deception that weighed on both of us. The most difficult aspect of this arrangement was watching Michael's comfort level with the deception gradually increase over time. What had initially been an uncomfortable but necessary compromise slowly became a more natural dynamic that required less conscious effort to maintain. He began accepting his family's praise for our financial stability and lifestyle improvements with less visible discomfort, responding to their concerns about his responsibilities as a provider with confident reassurances rather than awkward deflections. This evolution in Michael's attitude toward our arrangement was both understandable and troubling. The constant positive reinforcement he received from his family for being such a dedicated provider and generous husband was undoubtedly appealing, especially when combined with the genuine pride he felt in my professional achievements. He was able to enjoy the benefits of both realities, the satisfaction of being married to a successful, accomplished woman, and the social approval that came from being perceived as a traditional breadwinner who was supporting his family through his own hard work and sacrifice. Part 5. Years of Building Pressure Minors. The hidden toll by the third year of our marriage, the weight of maintaining parallel identities had begun to affect every aspect of my life in ways that I was only beginning to understand. The successful completion of the restaurant chain project had opened doors to even larger opportunities, including corporate clients who required comprehensive branding packages and ongoing design support that generated steady monthly retainer fees. What had started as a freelance side business had evolved into Creative Edge Design Studio, a legitimate small business with its own tax identification number, business checking account, and professional liability insurance. The financial transformation was dramatic and undeniable. My annual income had grown to exceed Michael's salary by a substantial margin, a shift that affected not only our household budget but also our long-term financial planning and lifestyle decisions. We were able to accelerate our house hunting timeline, consider properties in neighborhoods that would have been unaffordable on a single income, and begin discussing plans for future investments and retirement savings that reflected our combined earning potential rather than traditional single breadwinner expectations. However, the emotional and psychological costs of concealing this success from Michael's family were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Every Sunday dinner required a performance that left me feeling drained and diminished, pretending to be someone I no longer was while listening to conversations that consistently undervalued my contributions and achievements. The cognitive dissonance between my weekday identity as a confident business owner and my Sunday persona as Michael's supportive but financially dependent wife was creating a persistent sense of unreality that affected my relationships both within and outside the Peterson family circle. The most painful aspect of this ongoing deception was watching how it affected Michael's relationship with his parents and sister. Frank's paternal advice about financial responsibility and career advancement was becoming increasingly irrelevant to our actual situation, but Michael felt obligated to listen respectfully and respond as if these lectures contained wisdom that he needed to hear. Carol's maternal concern about the pressure Michael must feel as the family's primary provider was both touching and misguided, creating guilt and confusion that affected his confidence and peace of mind. Amanda's financial struggles during this period added another layer of complexity to our family dynamics that made the deception even more emotionally taxing. Kevin's inconsistent income from electrical work was creating genuine hardship for their family, forcing them to make difficult decisions about housing, transportation, and their children's activities that I watched with growing frustration and helplessness.
The irony of the situation was almost unbearable. I had the financial resources and business expertise that could potentially help Amanda and Kevin improve their situation, but I couldn't offer assistance without revealing the true scope of my own success. The house hunting process became a particularly challenging test of our ability to maintain the deception while making decisions that reflected our actual financial capacity. Michael and I were pre-approved for mortgage amounts that would have been impossible based on his income alone, but explaining this qualification to his family required increasingly creative interpretations of our financial situation. We had to downplay the significance of my business income in our loan application while somehow accounting for our ability to afford properties that seemed beyond the reach of a pharmaceutical sales manager's salary. When we finally found the house on Elm Street, the property represented everything I had worked towards since starting my business: a beautiful home in an excellent neighborhood with dedicated office space that could accommodate my growing firm and its expanding equipment needs. The four-bedroom ranch had been completely renovated by the previous owners, featuring hardwood floors, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a master suite that felt like a luxury hotel. Most importantly, it included a converted bedroom that was perfect for my business needs, with built-in shelving, excellent natural lighting, and enough space for multiple workstations when I was ready to hire employees. The mortgage application process required full disclosure of our financial situation to the lending institution, creating a permanent record of my role as the primary borrower and my business as the main income source supporting our loan qualification. However, this information remained confidential between us and the bank, allowing the Peterson family to maintain their assumptions about our financial arrangement while we moved forward with purchasing a home that truly reflected our combined earning potential and professional success. Moving into the Elm Street house marked a significant milestone in both my personal and professional development, but it also intensified the emotional strain of living with such a fundamental disconnect between my public and private identities. The house was undeniably beautiful and represented genuine achievement that I wanted to celebrate and share with the people I considered family. However, every compliment about our beautiful home and every expression of admiration for Michael's ability to provide so well for his family felt like a denial of my own contributions and sacrifices. The home office I created in the converted bedroom became both a sanctuary and a symbol of everything I was hiding from Michael's family. The space was professionally designed with state-of-the-art equipment, professional lighting, and organizational systems that reflected the serious nature of my work. I had invested in high-end computers, professional cameras for product photography, a large-format printer for creating presentation materials, and furniture that could accommodate the long hours required for complex design projects. The walls displayed framed samples of my best work, including the restaurant chain rebrand that had launched my reputation in the hospitality industry and several corporate identity packages that had won regional design awards. However, this impressive professional space had to remain largely invisible to Michael's family, mentioned only in passing as my little office where I worked on computer projects that helped supplement our household income. When Carol or Frank visited our home, I would quickly close the office door and steer conversations away from detailed discussions of my work setup or current projects. The disconnect between the sophisticated nature of my actual business operations and the casual way I was forced to discuss them created a constant tension that affected my ability to take pride in my achievements. The growth of Creative Edge Design Studio during this period exceeded even my most optimistic projections from the early days of my freelance career. Word-of-mouth referrals from satisfied clients had created a steady stream of new business opportunities, ranging from small local retailers to regional corporations that needed comprehensive branding solutions. I had developed expertise in multiple design specialties, including restaurant and hospitality branding, retail marketing materials, corporate identity packages, and digital marketing assets that required understanding of web design principles and social media strategies. The complexity of managing these diverse projects while maintaining the illusion of a small hobby business required increasingly sophisticated organizational skills and time management strategies. I had implemented client management software, project tracking systems, and financial reporting tools that allowed me to monitor my business performance with the same precision used by much larger firms. My client contracts included detailed scope definitions, milestone payment schedules, and intellectual property protections that reflected my growing understanding of professional business practices. The financial success of these projects was transforming our household economic situation in ways that became increasingly difficult to explain without acknowledging my central role in generating our income. We were able to pay off our credit card debt completely, establish substantial emergency savings, and begin investing in retirement accounts that would provide long-term financial security. Our monthly budget included categories for home improvements, travel, and discretionary spending that would have been impossible to maintain on Michael's salary alone, yet these lifestyle improvements had to be attributed to his success in financial management rather than our combined earning power. The psychological impact of this ongoing deception was manifesting in ways that affected my relationships beyond the Peterson family circle. Professional networking events became complicated exercises in identity management, as I struggled to present myself authentically to potential clients and colleagues, while maintaining the fiction that my business was a minor side interest rather than a thriving enterprise. When other business owners asked about my growth plans or discussed the challenges of balancing entrepreneurship with family obligations, I found myself giving evasive answers that didn't reflect my actual situation or ambitions. The isolation created by these dual identities was particularly evident in my relationships with other women in my age group, both within and outside the Peterson family social circle. Many of Michael's female relatives and family friends were stay-at-home mothers who had made conscious decisions to prioritize childcare and household management over career advancement. Their conversations often centered around children's activities, school volunteering, and domestic projects that required significant time investments but generated no direct income. I wanted to connect with these women and learn from their experiences, particularly as Michael and I began discussing our own plans for starting a family. However, the assumption that I was financially dependent on Michael created a false sense of shared circumstances that made genuine friendship difficult to develop. They viewed me as someone who had the luxury of pursuing creative hobbies because her husband was financially successful, rather than as a woman who was actively building a business while also managing household responsibilities and family relationships. The conversations during family gatherings became increasingly stilted as my actual life diverged further from the role I was expected to play. When other family members discussed career challenges, workplace politics, or professional achievements, I was forced to remain largely silent rather than risk revealing information that might contradict the established narrative about my limited professional involvement. When financial topics arose, such as discussions about home purchases, investment strategies, or retirement planning, my expertise and experience had to remain hidden while I listened to advice that was often less sophisticated than the financial planning Michael and I were actually implementing. The annual family vacation planning discussions became particularly difficult to navigate, as our increased income allowed us to consider destinations and accommodations that seemed inconsistent with our supposed financial limitations. When we suggested contributing to family trip expenses or proposed upgrades to hotel accommodations, these offers had to be framed in terms of Michael's generosity and success, rather than our genuine ability to afford such expenditures. The elaborate explanations required to justify our lifestyle improvements, without acknowledging my income, became increasingly convoluted and difficult to maintain consistently. Amanda's growing resentment toward our apparent prosperity added another emotional burden that affected my ability to enjoy our actual success. Her comments about couples who lived beyond their means and showed off their wealth were clearly directed at what she perceived as Michael's irresponsible spending and lack of concern for family members who were struggling financially. The irony of her criticism was particularly painful because it was based on such a fundamental misunderstanding of our situation and prevented me from offering the practical help and business advice that might have genuinely improved her family's circumstances. The most challenging aspect of Amanda's attitude was her tendency to compare her situation unfavorably with ours, creating a dynamic that poisoned family gatherings and made genuine connection impossible. She would make pointed comments about families who could afford to be generous, while others had to scrape by, not realizing that our financial stability was the result of years of hard work and business development rather than inherited wealth or luck. Her assumption that Michael was somehow withholding assistance from family members who needed help created tension and guilt that affected his relationship with his parents and his own sense of family responsibility. The holiday gift exchanges became annual reminders of how these misconceptions affected every aspect of our family relationships. Michael and I would carefully select presents that reflected genuine thoughtfulness and appropriate generosity, often spending significant amounts on items that we knew would bring joy to family members. However, the gratitude and appreciation expressed for these gifts was always directed exclusively toward Michael, as if I had played no role in choosing, purchasing, or wrapping presents that sometimes represented substantial portions of my monthly business income. Carol's expressions of appreciation for our generosity were particularly difficult to accept gracefully, as she would consistently thank Michael for spoiling everyone and comment on his big heart and ability to take care of his family. Frank would pat Michael's shoulder and make admiring comments about his son's success and generosity, never acknowledging that the financial resources enabling such gifts might come from sources other than Michael's pharmaceutical sales commissions. The credit card statements and bank records that documented our actual spending patterns told a very different story from the narrative accepted by Michael's family. My business income was funding not only our improved lifestyle, but also the generous gifts, family vacation contributions, and occasional financial assistance that enhanced Michael's reputation as a successful and caring family member. The disconnect between the source of these expenditures and the credit received for them created a constant undercurrent of resentment that I struggled to suppress in the interest of maintaining family harmony. The professional recognition I was receiving within the design community during this period made the contrast between my public and private identities even more stark. Creative Edge Design Studio had been featured in several industry publications as an example of successful small business development in the competitive Southern California market. I had been invited to speak at design conferences about building a freelance practice into a sustainable business, and my work had won awards from professional organizations that recognized excellence in branding and marketing communications. These achievements were meaningful validation of my skills and business acumen, but they had to remain largely private rather than sources of family celebration and pride. When industry colleagues contacted me for quotes in articles about women entrepreneurs or small business success stories, I had to carefully consider how much visibility would be appropriate without risking exposure that might complicate my family relationships. The professional networking opportunities that could have accelerated my business growth had to be evaluated not only for their potential benefits, but also for their likelihood of creating situations where my success might become known to people in Michael's social circle. The tax implications of my business growth were creating additional complications that required careful coordination with Michael to maintain our deception. Creative Edge Design Studio was generating enough revenue to require quarterly estimated tax payments, business expense tracking, and professional accounting services that reflected the serious nature of my operations. However, our joint tax returns had to be filed in ways that didn't draw attention to the relative proportions of our respective incomes. And financial planning discussions with our accountant had to be conducted carefully to avoid revealing information that might inadvertently reach Michael's family through social or professional connections. The retirement planning conversations that Michael and I were having with our financial advisor reflected earning potential and investment strategies that were inconsistent with the lifestyle of a single-income family dependent on pharmaceutical sales commissions. We were able to maximize contributions to retirement accounts, invest in diversified portfolios that included higher risk growth opportunities, and consider long-term financial goals that assumed continued business success and income growth. However, these sophisticated financial strategies had to remain private information that couldn't be shared with family members who might question how a sales manager could afford such comprehensive planning. The insurance needs of my growing business were creating additional administrative responsibilities that had to be managed discreetly to avoid raising questions about the scope of my professional activities. Professional liability insurance, business property coverage, and disability insurance that would protect my earning capacity required documentation and premium payments that reflected the true value of Creative Edge Design Studio, rather than the modest hobby business it was supposed to represent to Michael's family. The office space in our Elm Street house had evolved into a sophisticated business headquarters that could have been featured in magazines about home-based entrepreneurship, but its impressive capabilities had to remain largely hidden from family visitors. The professional photography setup I had assembled for product and architectural photography projects included lighting equipment, backdrop systems, and camera gear worth thousands of dollars. The computer workstations were configured for complex design software and large format printing that required processing power and memory far beyond typical home office requirements. The business library I had developed included reference books about branding strategy, marketing psychology, color theory, typography, and business management that reflected serious professional development rather than casual artistic interest. The filing systems contained client contracts, project documentation, vendor agreements, and financial records that demonstrated the complexity and sophistication of my business operations. However, when family members visited our home, this impressive professional setup had to be presented as a simple workspace where I did computer projects for local businesses. The annual business planning process that I conducted each December had become a sophisticated strategic exercise that involved market analysis, competitive research, pricing strategy development, and growth projections that extended several years into the future. Creative Edge Design Studio was positioned to expand into new service areas, potentially hire additional staff, and develop passive income streams through licensing agreements and partnership arrangements with other creative professionals. However, these ambitious business plans had to remain private rather than sources of family discussion and support. The emotional toll of maintaining such an elaborate deception was beginning to manifest in physical symptoms that affected my sleep patterns, appetite, and general sense of well-being. The constant vigilance required to monitor my words and actions during family gatherings was exhausting in ways that I hadn't anticipated when Michael and I first agreed to downplay my professional success. The cognitive dissonance between my authentic identity and my performed identity was creating a persistent sense of anxiety that followed me into every social situation involving his family. The most painful aspect of this ongoing performance was watching how it affected Michael's own sense of identity and self-worth. The constant praise he received from his family for being such a dedicated provider and successful husband was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of our actual circumstances, but it was also genuinely affecting his confidence and perspective on our relationship. He was beginning to internalize the narrative that portrayed him as the primary source of our family's stability and success, accepting credit for achievements that were largely mine, while simultaneously feeling pressure to live up to expectations that didn't reflect our reality. The approaching 4th anniversary of our marriage felt like a milestone that would require some resolution of these increasingly complex dynamics. The gap between perception and reality had grown so wide that maintaining the deception was requiring ever more elaborate explanations and careful coordination. The success of Creative Edge Design Studio was accelerating beyond what either of us had anticipated when we first agreed to keep my professional achievements private. And the lifestyle improvements enabled by this success were becoming increasingly difficult to attribute to Michael's pharmaceutical sales career alone. The house on Elm Street had become both a symbol of our genuine success and a stage for an ongoing performance that was exhausting both of us in different ways. The beautiful spaces we had created together reflected our combined efforts and shared vision for our future, but they also served as a backdrop for family gatherings where I had to pretend to be someone I was no longer becoming. The professional office that represented my greatest achievement had to remain largely invisible, mentioned only in passing as a spare room, where I occasionally worked on design projects that helped supplement our household income. Part 6. The success nobody sees: hidden achievements. Transformation of Creative Edge Design Studio from a freelance side business into a legitimate design firm happened so gradually that even I didn't fully grasp the magnitude of my success until I was forced to complete a comprehensive business evaluation for insurance purposes. The numbers were staggering and undeniable: annual revenue that exceeded 6 figures, a client roster that included nationally recognized brands, and profit margins that surpassed industry standards for established design
firms. What had begun as a creative outlet and supplemental income stream had evolved into a thriving enterprise that could support our entire household while providing financial security I had never imagined possible. The client portfolio that I had assembled over 4 years of dedicated work represented a cross-section of Southern California's most dynamic industries. The restaurant chain that had launched my reputation in hospitality branding had referred me to hotel groups, catering companies, and food service distributors who needed comprehensive visual identity packages. A successful retail boutique rebrand had opened doors to shopping center developers, franchise operations, and e-commerce startups that required both digital and print marketing materials. Corporate clients seeking professional presentation materials had led to ongoing relationships with law firms, medical practices, and technology companies that generated steady monthly retainer income. Each project had expanded my skills and industry knowledge in ways that positioned Creative Edge Design Studio as a versatile and reliable partner for businesses across multiple sectors. I had developed expertise in restaurant branding, retail marketing, corporate communications, and digital design that few freelancers could match. My understanding of printing processes, web development, social media marketing, and trademark law gave me the ability to guide clients through complex branding projects from initial concept development through final implementation and legal protection. The sophistication of my business operations had evolved to match the quality and complexity of my client work. I had implemented professional project management software that tracked deadlines, budgets, and client communications with the same precision used by large advertising agencies. Client contracts included detailed scope definitions, intellectual property protections, and payment terms that reflected my growing understanding of business law and industry standards. The financial reporting systems I had developed provided real-time insights into profitability, cash flow, and growth trends that informed strategic decisions about pricing, capacity, and future investments. The home office that had started as a converted spare bedroom had been transformed into a sophisticated design studio that rivaled many commercial facilities in terms of equipment and capabilities. Professional-grade computers running the latest design software could handle complex projects requiring high-resolution graphics, video editing, and interactive media development. A large-format printer allowed me to produce presentation materials, signage prototypes, and marketing collateral that demonstrated final quality rather than requiring clients to imagine finished results. Professional photography equipment enabled me to create original content for branding projects and document completed work for portfolio development. The business library I had assembled included hundreds of reference books covering design theory, marketing strategy, business development, and industry trends that informed every aspect of my work. Subscriptions to professional publications kept me current with emerging technologies, design movements, and business practices that affected my clients' industries. Membership in professional organizations provided access to continuing education opportunities, networking events, and industry resources that enhanced my credibility and expertise. The awards and recognition that Creative Edge Design Studio had received from professional organizations validated the quality of my work and positioned me as a serious competitor in the regional design market. A restaurant branding project had won a gold medal from the American Graphic Design Awards for excellence in identity development. A retail marketing campaign had been featured in How magazine as an example of effective small business advertising. Several corporate identity projects had received recognition from the Graphic Artists Guild for their innovative approach to professional services branding. These achievements represented not only personal satisfaction but also powerful marketing tools that attracted new clients and justified premium pricing for my services. The credibility that came with professional recognition allowed me to compete for projects that had previously been reserved for larger agencies with established reputations. Potential clients who might have been skeptical of a home-based freelancer were impressed by portfolio samples that had received industry validation and media coverage. The financial success of Creative Edge Design Studio was enabling lifestyle improvements and long-term planning that would have been impossible on Michael's salary alone, regardless of how successful he became in pharmaceutical sales. We were able to pay cash for home improvements that increased our property value and enhanced our daily living experience. Vacations to destinations that had once seemed financially unrealistic became annual traditions that enriched our relationship and broadened our perspectives. Investment accounts grew steadily through contributions that were far beyond what most couples our age could afford, providing financial security that would support our future family and retirement plans. The business networking events that I attended regularly had introduced me to other successful entrepreneurs who were building impressive companies in various industries throughout Southern California. These relationships provided valuable insights into business strategy, marketing approaches, and professional development opportunities that accelerated my own growth. However, the knowledge and experience I gained through these connections had to remain largely private rather than topics of conversation during Peterson family gatherings where such sophisticated business discussions would seem inconsistent with my supposed limited professional involvement. The mentoring requests that I received from aspiring designers and small business owners reflected my growing reputation as someone who had successfully navigated the transition from employee to entrepreneur. Young professionals sought my advice about building client relationships, pricing strategies, and business development techniques that had proven effective in competitive markets. Women entrepreneurs were particularly interested in my experience balancing business growth with family responsibilities and personal relationships. These mentoring opportunities were deeply rewarding and provided perspective on how much I had accomplished in a relatively short period of time. However, they also highlighted the isolation created by my inability to share these achievements with the people I considered family. The pride and satisfaction that came from helping other professionals develop their skills and build their businesses had to remain private rather than sources of family celebration and support. The speaking engagements that I was invited to deliver at design conferences and business development workshops represented significant professional recognition that validated my expertise and industry standing.
Conference organizers sought my perspective on topics ranging from small business branding strategies to the challenges of building a creative practice in competitive markets. These presentations were well received by audiences of professional designers, marketing directors, and small business owners who appreciated practical insights from someone who had successfully implemented the strategies she recommended. The preparation required for these speaking opportunities forced me to articulate the business principles and creative philosophies that had guided my success, creating clarity about my professional identity and future goals that was both empowering and isolating. The confidence that came from public recognition of my expertise was undermined by the knowledge that this success had to remain largely invisible to the people whose approval and support mattered most to me personally. The media coverage that Creative Edge Design Studio received in business publications and design magazines provided third-party validation of my achievements that extended beyond my immediate professional network. Articles about successful women entrepreneurs featured my business as an example of effective small business development and creative industry success. Design publications showcased my work as examples of innovative branding solutions and effective marketing communications. This media attention was valuable for business development and credibility building, but it also created anxiety about potential exposure that might reach Michael's family or social circle. Every interview request and publication opportunity had to be evaluated not only for its potential business benefits but also for the likelihood that it might create situations where my professional success would become known to people who believed I was financially dependent on Michael. The professional development investments that I made in continuing education, conference attendance, and skill building reflected a commitment to long-term growth that was inconsistent with the casual hobby business I was supposed to represent. Advanced workshops in digital marketing, brand strategy, and business development required significant time and financial commitments that demonstrated serious professional ambition rather than supplemental income generation. The industry certifications that I earned in specialized areas of design and marketing enhanced my credibility with sophisticated clients and justified premium pricing for services that required advanced expertise. However, these achievements had to be mentioned carefully, if at all, during family conversations where too much professional development might seem inconsistent with the narrative of limited business involvement that we had established. The vendor relationships that I had developed with printers, photographers, web developers, and marketing consultants created a network of professional partnerships that enhanced my service offerings and enabled me to take on larger projects that required coordinated expertise across multiple disciplines. These relationships reflected the kind of business sophistication that typically developed over many years of professional practice rather than the casual client work that my family believed comprised my entire business operation. The contract negotiations that I conducted with major clients required understanding of complex legal and financial issues that went far beyond simple freelance arrangements. Intellectual property rights, usage licensing, payment terms, and liability protections were standard components of agreements that reflected my position as a serious business partner rather than a casual service provider. The legal and accounting professionals that I consulted for guidance on these matters treated Creative Edge Design Studio as a legitimate enterprise with significant growth potential and substantial financial implications. The business plan that I had developed for potential expansion included detailed market analysis, competitive positioning, financial projections, and strategic initiatives that could support hiring additional staff and expanding into new service areas. The plan reflected careful research and sophisticated understanding of industry trends, customer needs, and growth opportunities that positioned Creative Edge Design Studio for continued success and expansion. However, this ambitious vision for business growth had to remain private rather than a source of family discussion and support. The excitement and anxiety that came with planning for expansion, considering office space options, and developing hiring strategies had to be managed alone rather than shared with people who might offer valuable perspective and encouragement. Part 7. The breaking point approaches, mounting tension. The contradiction between my professional reality and my family persona reached a critical mass during the spring of our 4th year of marriage when multiple pressures converged to create an unsustainable situation that demanded resolution. Amanda's financial crisis had deepened to the point where she and Kevin were facing potential eviction from their rental house, a situation that was causing tremendous stress for the entire Peterson family and creating expectations for assistance that I was uniquely qualified to provide but supposedly unable to offer. Kevin's electrical work had been sporadic throughout the winter months, leaving their family dependent on unemployment benefits that were insufficient to cover their basic living expenses. Amanda had taken a part-time job at a department store, but the combination of her limited work schedule and minimum wage earnings was nowhere near enough to make up for Kevin's lost income. They had fallen 3 months behind on rent, maxed out their credit cards on essential expenses, and were facing the humiliating prospect of asking Carol and Frank for financial help that the retired couple could not afford to provide. The desperation in Amanda's voice during family dinners was heartbreaking to witness, particularly because I knew that my business expertise and financial resources could potentially solve many of their problems. Creative Edge Design Studio was generating more than enough income to provide temporary financial assistance while Amanda and Kevin developed more sustainable solutions to their economic challenges. My experience in small business development could have helped them explore alternative income sources, improve Kevin's marketing strategies for attracting electrical work, or even launch a small business that could provide more reliable earnings. However, offering such assistance would require revealing the true scope of my financial capacity and professional expertise, information that would fundamentally challenge every assumption that Michael's family had maintained about our household dynamics. The irony of the situation was almost unbearable. I was forced to sit silently while family members discussed Amanda's crisis as if I were powerless to help, when in reality I was probably the most financially stable and business-savvy person at the table. Frank's attempts to provide practical advice were well-intentioned but limited by his own experience in traditional employment and his generation's approach to economic challenges. His suggestions focused on budget cutting, finding additional part-time work, and seeking assistance from social service organizations that might provide temporary relief. While these recommendations were reasonable, they reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of the modern economy and the opportunities available to people with entrepreneurial skills and ambition. Carol's emotional response to Amanda's situation was creating additional family tension that affected everyone's ability to enjoy gatherings that had traditionally been sources of comfort and connection. Her maternal instincts made her want to solve her daughter's problems, but her limited financial resources and lack of business experience left her feeling helpless and frustrated. The stress of watching her child struggle was manifesting in increased criticism of other family members' spending decisions and lifestyle choices, creating an atmosphere of guilt and defensiveness that poisoned previously harmonious relationships. Michael's position in this family crisis was particularly complicated because his parents and sister expected him to provide leadership and possibly financial assistance based on their perception of his success and stability. The pressure he felt to live up to these expectations was affecting his confidence and peace of mind, even though our actual financial situation would have made helping Amanda relatively easy and stress-free. The gap between what his family expected from him and what he felt capable of providing was creating anxiety that affected our private relationship as well as his family interactions. The business opportunities that were emerging during this period represented potential for growth that could have transformed Creative Edge Design Studio from a successful small business into a regional design firm with multiple employees and expanded service offerings. A major hotel chain was considering hiring me to redesign their entire brand identity, including signage, marketing materials, and interior design consultation for properties throughout the western United States. The potential contract was worth more than I had earned in the previous 2 years combined and would establish my reputation as a serious competitor for large-scale hospitality projects. Pursuing such opportunities required business development activities that were difficult to conceal from Michael's family, particularly when they involved travel for client presentations, extended work periods that affected my availability for family obligations, and lifestyle changes that reflected increased income and professional status. The hotel chain project would require site visits to properties in multiple states, presentations to corporate executives, and coordination with architects, contractors, and marketing professionals who expected sophisticated business practices and communication. The time management challenges created by these expanding opportunities were becoming increasingly difficult to balance with the family expectations and social obligations that had characterized my role in Michael's extended family. Business travel that was essential for client development had to be explained carefully to avoid revealing the scope and sophistication of my professional activities. Evening and weekend work sessions that were necessary for complex projects had to be scheduled around family dinners and social events that were considered mandatory rather than optional. The professional wardrobe that I needed for client meetings and industry events was inconsistent with the casual domestic image that I was supposed to maintain within Michael's family. Business suits, professional accessories, and conference attire represented investments that reflected serious career ambition rather than the limited professional involvement that our deception required. Even my hairstyle and general appearance had to be managed carefully to avoid seeming too polished or business-oriented during family gatherings. The networking requirements of my expanding business were creating social obligations that conflicted with Peterson family traditions and expectations. Industry conferences, professional association meetings, and client entertainment were essential for continued growth but difficult to explain without revealing the true nature of my professional commitments. The relationships I was building with other successful entrepreneurs and creative professionals were enriching my perspective and accelerating my business development, but they had to remain largely separate from my family relationships. The financial planning discussions that Michael and I were having with our advisors reflected income levels and investment strategies that were becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile with the lifestyle of a single-income family dependent on pharmaceutical sales. Our retirement contributions, insurance coverage, and emergency savings were appropriate for our actual earning capacity but excessive for our supposed financial situation. The tax implications of my business growth were requiring professional accounting services and strategic planning that reflected serious wealth accumulation rather than supplemental income generation. The home improvements that we were considering for our Elm Street house included upgrades that would enhance both our personal comfort and my business operations. But explaining these investments required careful coordination to avoid revealing their true purpose and funding source. A kitchen renovation that would create better space for entertaining clients, landscaping improvements that would enhance the professional appearance of our property, and technology upgrades that would support my business operations had to be presented as personal preferences rather than professional necessities. The vacation planning that had become an annual tradition was requiring increasingly creative explanations for our ability to afford destinations and accommodations that seemed inconsistent with our supposed income limitations. Michael and I were both eager to travel internationally, explore cultures and cuisines that would broaden our perspectives and create memories that would enrich our relationship. However, these desires had to be balanced against the need to maintain credible explanations for our spending capacity and travel preferences. The gift-giving expectations that had developed within the Peterson family were creating additional pressure to maintain generous contributions while avoiding acknowledgement of the income source that made such generosity possible. Holiday presents, birthday celebrations, and special occasion gifts were important expressions of love and family connection, but they also represented significant financial commitments that had to be attributed to Michael's success rather than our combined earning capacity. The charitable giving that we wanted to pursue as our income increased was complicated by the need to avoid visibility that might reveal our true financial situation. Contributing to causes that we cared about, supporting local organizations that served our community, and participating in fundraising events were important expressions of our values but also potential sources of exposure that might complicate our family relationships. The investment opportunities that our financial advisor was presenting reflected wealth accumulation strategies that assumed continued high income and long-term financial stability. Real estate investments, business partnerships, and diversified portfolio development were appropriate for our actual situation but inconsistent with the financial planning that a pharmaceutical sales manager's family might reasonably pursue. The insurance coverage that we needed to protect my business assets and earning capacity required documentation and premium payments that reflected the true value of Creative Edge Design Studios' intellectual property, equipment, and client relationships. Professional liability insurance, business interruption coverage, and disability protection were essential safeguards but also evidence of business sophistication that contradicted the casual hobby narrative we had established. The legal considerations surrounding my business growth were requiring consultations with attorneys who specialized in intellectual property, contract law, and business development. Trademark applications, client agreement templates, and vendor contract negotiations were standard business practices that reflected serious professional commitment rather than casual creative work. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.